Hi, everybody. So there's a few new folks here tonight, so maybe I'll give a brief introduction, like what the hell are we doing here? Why are we doing this crazy thing? I've been doing this Zen practice here with Empty Gate Zen Center since 1979. First time I ever did meditation, I was about 14 years old. And I'm slowly getting old. So this has been happening. You're all slowly getting old too. Some of you are a lot younger, but you too are slowly getting old. Actually, we're all getting old at the same pace, but we don't know it. Those of us who feel older, we start saying, oh, I'm getting old. But we're all getting old. And we're all getting a little bit closer to dying. And Zen is a kind of Buddhism. And we say Zen deals with the great work of life and death. What am I doing here? And one of the ways we remember that question is by remembering that we're going to die. Most people in our culture don't like to talk about dying, but it happens. And you know, so often I sit in this room and I say, we don't know when that time will be. And the first Tuesday of every month, I have a meeting of the executive board of our national organization. So it starts at 9 o'clock and we do it on the phone. And I noticed during this meeting that my phone rang, and I was really surprised who it was. But I was in the meeting and the person who it was left a voicemail, and I forgot about it. And then about 3 hours later, I said, oh yeah, there's that voicemail. And I played the voicemail, and I found out that this person I know pretty well died. And he died in an accident. And honestly, I probably spent 2 days. It's now been 2 days, and I haven't really been able to integrate it into my mind. I see this person periodically, and I wasn't scheduled to see them for a couple of weeks. But now I'm looking out a couple of weeks from now, and I realize he's not going to be there. And this wasn't an old person. This wasn't somebody sick. This wasn't somebody who you think, okay, he's lived a long life. And, you know, we all have this fantasy, or at least I do. Live a long time and you slowly fade away. And then by the time it's going to come, you're kind of exhausted, so it's a blessing. We all say when somebody's really old or they're really sick, you say, oh, it's a blessing, they finally got released and they got to go. This wasn't like that at all. And so much of our life is unknown. And so much of our life is, probably it's fair to say frightening. And we don't really know how to deal with that. So what we do is we create this elaborate schema, if you will, to protect ourselves, to fake ourselves out. And we start when we're really small. And we do this, we human beings, we do this in such a way that we don't really know that we're doing it. But most of us, especially people who find themselves in a room like this, something nags at us. It's like, something seems off. For me, when I was young, like a teenager, I would look around at the men in my community. I grew up in kind of a suburban New York, and I'd look at the men my father's age, or a little younger, a little older, and I'd think, they were all full of shit. They were all playing a game. Somehow with them, I was able to see it. And once I started seeing it with them, I started looking at people in myself and my friends and people who I knew, and there was so much inauthenticity. There was so much posturing. There was so much pretending. There was so much insincerity. And everybody's different. But for me, I started to notice that. And I started to think, that's not the life I want. I want something more real, more authentic, more alive, if you will. And at the time first I found meditation, and then I found Buddhism and Zen. And Zen it didn't answer the questions that I had, but it spoke of the questions that I have. And it's really important, I started to say it answered the questions. Zen doesn't really give you a lot of answers. But Zen validates the question. And then it says, explore it, look for it. What is your question? What is it that moves you? And then investigate it. So we often say to practice Zen means to ask the question, what am I? What is this? What's actually going on? What is truth? We can hear, we can feel, but what do we hear? How do we hear? How do we feel? How do we fool ourselves? One of the things that I've grown accustomed to is looking for the assumptions that I make. And I usually discover the assumptions when I find out that they're wrong. And I've come to a point that I rejoice when that happens. It's like, oh yeah, that was another one. It's like, pop another balloon. Wake up. Again, remember I said Zen is about about the great work of life and death. What am I? We investigate this question with a not knowing mind. It's the opposite of gaining knowledge. In Zen, we're not really trying to gain knowledge. We're not trying to understand and memorize all 84,000 pages of the sutras. We're just asking the question, what am I? So, as you saw tonight, we sit in silence and we slow our breath. And what science is now showing is when we slow our breath, we bring ourselves into a state of relaxation. Years ago I read that a state of relaxation is, if you can get your breath to about 6 breaths a minute, your body will go through a physiological change and you'll enter into a state of relaxation. Over the years, what I've discovered practicing, I can actually slow my breath down more than that. 3 breaths a minute, 4 breaths a minute. And when you do that, your body goes through a transformation. And it allows you to witness. First of all, think about your own life. How much do you walk around in a frenzy? How much is your energy drawn out of you? How much is your excitement or fears or desires or neediness or your unhappiness? We're constantly stirred up by all these things. And when we're stirred up like that, we can't see clearly. We can't hear clearly. We even don't smell clearly. We don't taste what's really in our mouths because we're all worked up. So just that instruction that we give in meditation, bring your attention down to your lower abdomen. In Japan, they call this area in the lower abdomen the hara, which we translate as center. So we draw our attention to the center of our being. In Korea and in China, they call this area the Tangen. Tangen means energy garden. So by bringing our attention and awareness down, we're getting out of the frenzy of mind and emotion. And we're going to find a place of more clarity and stability. From that place of clarity and stability, we ask, what is this? What am I? And then we look. We listen. Not through the lens of our ideas and beliefs, but just to what is. So right now, I'm feeling the breeze from the ceiling fan. Now, I like the breeze of the ceiling fan. Somebody else may not like the breeze of the ceiling fan. Yeah, it dries out my eyes. I don't like this. See, so we color the simple experience of the breeze, and we filter it and color it through our own desires and opinions. And in Zen practice, we start to investigate those desires and opinions, beliefs, so that we can, in a sense, see through them and just feel the breeze. One of the things we did today was walking meditation. One of the reasons we do walking meditation is to get off of our cushions, open our eyes, and actually do the same kind of meditation that we're doing sitting down, but in action. If you can do walking meditation, you can do driving meditation. You can do talking meditation, listening meditation. You can do making love meditation. Everything can become a meditation. What is it right now? Get in touch with your real experience, and you become alive. And at least the way I look at Zen practice and Buddhism in general is that it's a practice to be truly alive. In our minds, we think we're alive when we're getting what we want. But the problem with getting what we want is that eventually we don't get what we want, or we get bored with what we want. What the Buddha said is that we suffer because either we don't have what we want, or we have what we want, but we're afraid we're going to lose it. You know, so the rich person puts walls around their wealth, and they end up becoming very fearful and vigilant because you might steal it. Or they become more and more desirous and figure out ways to get more and more. We're all like that in some ways. We're all rich in experience in some ways, and we're always wanting more of what we want. Problem is, we want less of what we don't want. Even though sometimes exactly what we don't want is the thing that's going to give us the most benefit. So in Zen practice, we're trying to break out of the prison of our own likes and dislikes. The third patriarch of Zen, he lived probably 600s, maybe the 500s in China. And he's the person who's credited of bringing Taoism and Buddhism together, and that out of that marriage comes Zen Buddhism. And he has a very famous poem, which is titled, in English we say, Trust in Mind. And he says, "The great way is not difficult for those who don't pick and choose." Once we begin picking and choosing, we separate the world into good and bad, right and wrong. Now, of course, if you think about it, every one of us is making good and bad, choosing. It's not about not doing that. It's about being aware of the process of doing it. The more we become aware of the process of doing it, the more we wake up. The more we wake up, the more possible it is to be present with another person and to offer our help, our care, our love. I don't remember if Paul said it when he introduced me, but besides being a Zen teacher, I'm also a psychotherapist. And I'm working with somebody now who probably a 15-year marriage is ending. And as the person would be recounting to me all the problems that they went through and the difficulty of the separation, I kept asking him, I said, well, does she ever voice a concern about how these behaviors are for you. Because her partner, or his partner, was acting in ways, he was finding out that his partner was acting in ways for 10 years that he knew nothing about. It was deceiving her. So I said, well, does she seem to care how that is for you? And she never got to that point. It was all about her. So once we can understand our behaviors, and if we can have empathy for how that is for another person, that changes our consciousness. But if we're so self-centered that and I say so self-centered, it sounds so terrible, but most of us are self-centered. That is the truth of the human experience. And Buddhism is offering us another way. I'm a realist, so it's not about not being self-centered, but it's about bringing up others close to importance. It'd be nice if we could say, oh, others are equally important as me. That would be great. But realistically, if you just bring them up a little bit closer to your own self-importance, it changes your perspective. And if one thing Buddhism teaches is that our perspective is actually somewhat arbitrary. It grows out of the conditions in our lives, and then we believe it as if it's true, but it's a construct. And once we see that the construct can change, we realize that there's freedom in our life. And if we can grab that freedom, we can change, and we can grow, and we can become more free, and we can give that to others. So we do these practices, the sitting practice we did tonight, this chanting practice we did tonight. Sometimes if you come early morning, you'll find that we do a bowing practice, which is a little bit of an energy practice. We do 108 prostrations pretty quickly. Especially in the early morning, it wakes our body up, it wakes our minds up, so that we're ready to experience. We have talking practice, we have interview practice, we have everyday life practice, driving, sleeping, eating. Everything becomes practice because we're asking this question, what is this? What am I? And we're present and alive in the midst of it. The Buddha it's just, in Asia now, it's just Buddha's birthday time. We use the Western calendar, so for us, Buddha's birthday is the 8th day of April, which is the 4th month. If you're on the Asian calendar, it's the 8th day of the 4th month, and somehow I think that was last weekend. And the reason that the Buddha's story is so valuable to us is because the Buddha grew up privileged. The Buddha grew up extremely wealthy, and he grew up with a father that was very concerned about what he was going to become. Anybody recognize that one? And the Buddha's father was given a prophecy when the Buddha was born. Of course, he wasn't called the Buddha then. And the prophecy was he's either going to be a great leader of nations, like the king, or he was going to be a great religious figure. Well, his father didn't want his son to be a religious figure at all. So he devised this plot to trick his son. He was not going to show his son anything that would stimulate religious feelings. So what his father figured, if my son doesn't know anything about the suffering of the world, then he'll just be a great leader. So he hid poverty. He hid the fact that people don't always get what they want. So he raised his son to get everything that he wanted. He hid old age. He hid sickness. He hid death. He hid poverty. He hid any kind of suffering. Now it's ironic because if you know the story of the Buddha's mother died 7 days after he was born. So, yeah, a young 7-day-old doesn't really understand death. But there was this elaborate plot to fool him. I would contend we've all experienced that plot. Our parents, our society fools us into belief systems. When the Buddha was, I think it was 28 years old or 29 years old, he discovered these things existed, and his response was, well, if my whole life has been a lie, what is the truth? And he went out to discover the truth. Some people try to discover the truth by looking outward. Maybe you go to college and you study, you learn what other people have taught, have said about things. But what the Buddha did was he turned inward and he asked, what is truth? What am I? And he did a self-examination. And what he discovered was he and the whole universe was one thing. That includes every one of us, and it includes the mats that we're sitting on, and the floor that holds up the mat. If you understand anything about building, the floor joists that are beneath the floor, the posts that are holding up those floor joists, the earth that those posts are set into, all the way down to the center of the earth, and all the way up to the heavens. When you look at those amazing pictures from the Hubble telescope, what you're seeing is yourself. Everything in this universe is the same thing. That's me telling you that. The Buddha experienced it. And I guess I want to offer you that question. How could that be? How is it that we're all the same and everything is the same? And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. This is an intellectual hint. But if you think of the periodic chart of elements that we learn about in chemistry in high school, what you learn is every element, known element in our world is made up of, and of course it's made up of more than this or more subparticles of this, but simply put, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Everything's made up of the same thing. The only thing that's different is how many of them there are. So oxygen has 8 of them. Hydrogen has 2 of them. But they're the same of thems. And that includes our bodies, and that includes these mats that we're sitting on. Everything is made up of the same substance. That's a scientific truth. But we're prone to see things as different, which of course they are. The wall is different than the floor, but it's made up of the same substance. And on the most fundamental level, we're all the same. So our question is, what am I? And our answer is, don't know. If we can use this not knowing mind, we can wake up. Our knowing mind eventually leads us to a dead end. Our not knowing mind leads us to an open doorway. And the challenge for all of us is to step into that doorway. And that's what we're doing here at the Zen Center. We're practicing so that when the time comes, which is now, we can step in and we can be alive. And we can help other people, other beings, and help this world. Because we all know it needs it.